The Granger movement was a movement that started in reaction to the growing influence of the railroad industry over farmers during the Gilded Age. The creation of trusts and the monopolistic railroad industry had begun to charge high rates for transportation of crops, which led to resentment among farmers. The movement started with a man named Oliver Hudson Kelley in 1867 when he formed an organization called the Order of the Patrons of Husbandry. The organization was formed to join farmers together and was divided into local units called granges, hence the name, the Granger Movement. It is interesting to note that women who were a part of the movement had equal voting rights in the Granger. One of the main reasons for the formation of the granges was the corruptness of the railroads. Pools were a way for railroad companies to enhance their profits by agreeing to take a certain area and divide the business in profits. In addition to the use of pools, railroads gave rebates or refunds to shippers in exchange for promised business. This use of rebates was a way of undercutting the competition. Another tactic employed by railroads was the practice of charging higher rates for short routes without competition than for long routes with competition. These corrupt practices eventually led to the passing of the Granger state laws. Granger state laws were a way for railroads to be regulated. Some of the most important pieces of legislation were fixed passenger fare rates and acts requiring railroads to not charge more for a short distance than long. These laws, among others, led to anger among railroad industry leaders who claimed that the laws were impacting their rights. This eventually led to the repealing of some of the more radical legislation. Although the Granger movement did not achieve complete regulation of railroads, it brought awareness to the cause. In reaction to the Granger legislation, railroad baron Commodore Vanderbilt said, "Can't I do what I want with my own?" This was a common reaction with many of the prominent businessmen of the time. The Munn v. Illinois case in 1877 arose during the populist movement and questioned whether the General Assembly of Illinois could set a maximum price for the storage of grain. The case upheld that states could control grain elevator rates, which set a precedent for future regulation regarding public utilities. Later on, in 1886, the Wabash case said that states do not have the power to regulate interstate railway rates. This counteracted a lot of the legislation that Grangers had fought for, including the ruling of Munn v. Illinois. In 1887, the Interstate Commerce Act was one of the first attempts by the U.S. government to control the growing issues of corruption in American industries. The previous policy of little government interference needed to be interrupted in order to control manipulation by monopolies. The act required railroads to make their rates public and prevented the formation of pools and use of rebates. It also set up the ICC, or Interstate Commerce Commission, which was to enforce the protective legislation. While the act did begin a new idea of federal interference in business, it did not completely solve the issue of corrupt business practices during the Gilded Age. The Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890 and was a way of combating monopolies in American industries, and was the first attempt by the U.S. Congress to resolve the issues between farmers and the railroad industry. Politically, the Gilded Age was a time of fierce partisanship, and majority of elections were very close. Little legislation was actually passed, and Republicans dominated politics. The Democratic Party was mostly made up of white Catholic Southerners, the poor of the cities, immigrants, and farmers. The Republican Party, on the other hand, was mostly white Protestant Northerners, African Americans, and the middle class. Due to the issues of corrupt business practices, unions began to form during the Gilded Age. One of these main unions was the Knights of Labor. It was formed after the downfall of the National Labor Union, which had formed in 1866. The Knights of Labor formed in 1869 as a secret society in order to avoid detection by employers. The organization allowed both skilled and unskilled workers, and also women and African Americans. Knights fought for labor rights such as no child labor, equal pay, elimination of private banks, and most prominently for an 8-hour workday. Strikes led by Terence Powderly for the 8-hour day were very successful. Over time, the Knights of Labor lost influence after the Haymarket Square bomb, which is blamed on the Knights, but thought to actually have been led by anarchists, and also mismanagement and other not-so-successful strikes. Later on, the American Federation of Labor was formed and headed by a man named Samuel Gompers and began in 1886. The Federation was made up of many national unions, which all adhered to the strategies of the overall Federation. The philosophy of Gompers and the unions was pure and simple unionism, and they wanted better wages, hours, and working conditions. The union is made up of skilled workers in order to be able to wage some political and economic influence. Several different union members who worked for companies that manufactured women's clothing founded the International Ladies Garment Workers Union in 1900. The organization was made up of both men and women and skilled and unskilled workers. Events such as the Uprising by 20,000 gave the organization recognition and drew attention to the idea of the right to collective bargain and unionize. Collective bargaining is the right for workers to choose a representative to negotiate certain terms with their employer. By 1900, many unions realized that they should have the right to bargain with their employers. Although most businessmen were not open to this form of bargaining, some industrialists realized that it was a less costly alternative to allow collective bargaining than entering into economic warfare with laborers. Following his death, a newspaper recognized Thomas Nast as the father of American caricature. Nast was known for his political cartoons against corrupt businessmen such as New York's William Tweed and his aid in helping candidates win elections. His cartoons are very influential on the public, and he set a standard for many cartoonists to come. Jane Addams established the Hull House in 1889 in Chicago as America's most well-known settlement house. The massive wave of immigrants to the big cities, such as Chicago, led to poverty among the immigrants, who the government did not aid much in settlement. Jane saw the immigrants as people in need and opened the house in order to help educate them and assimilate them into American life. The opening of the Hull House led to the opening of other settlement houses and became a prominent way for women to become active in communities, while also eventually leading to the profession of a social worker.